She cried to the doctor, "Please save my baby," but he said a firm no. The old clock on the wall of Rocheport Village Hospital struck 2 a.m., its dull chime echoing through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Tanisha Grant lay on the cold hospital bed, its thin mattress offering little comfort against the metal frame that creaked with her every movement. Her dark skin glistened with sweat in the flickering fluorescent light, each bead reflecting the artificial glare like tiny, desperate stars. "God, please," she whispered, her fingers clutching the rough hospital sheets that had seen too many washings, their once white fabric now a tired grey. "Please don't take my baby too." Her wedding ring caught the light as she moved, the modest gold band that Martin had saved for months to buy her, back when their biggest worry was making rent on their small apartment near the college. The contractions came like waves now, each one stronger than the last. Tanisha could feel them building from deep within her spine, rolling forward like thunder until they crashed through her entire body. She tried to remember her breathing exercises from the one prenatal class she'd managed to attend before Martin's accident, but the pain scattered her thoughts like autumn leaves in a storm. Through the window, she could see the massive oak tree that had stood guard over the hospital for generations. Lightning illuminated its branches in stark bursts, creating twisted shadows that danced across the linoleum floor. The storm had rolled in from the west, just like the one on the night Martin died. Another cruel parallel that wasn't lost on her. Dr. William Harrison stood in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, his white coat pristine and buttoned despite the summer heat. His face bore the lined map of 60 years, but his eyes held something colder than age, a calculated disdain that made Tanisha's skin crawl. Behind him, nurses Mary Beth Collins and Sarah Palmer exchanged knowing looks, their matching pearl earrings gleaming like tiny judgments in the harsh light. "Please," Tanisha tried again, her voice stronger now, fueled by a mother's desperation. "Something's wrong. The baby. I can't feel—" She broke off as another contraction seized her, this one bringing a new kind of pain, sharp, wrong, urgent. The monitoring equipment she'd been hooked to earlier beeped with increasing urgency, its digital warnings falling on deliberately deaf ears. Dr. Harrison adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses with manicured fingers, checking his Rolex with exaggerated care. "As I've explained, Miss Grant—" "Mrs. Gray," Tanisha corrected automatically, clinging to Martin's name like a lifeline. "I'm Mrs. Martin Gray." The doctor's lip curled slightly. "As I've explained, this facility is not equipped to handle your particular case. St. Mary's Hospital in Columbia would be more appropriate for someone of your background." Each pause was deliberate, each word carefully chosen to wound while maintaining a veneer of professional detachment. Nurse Collins stepped forward, her shoes squeaking against the floor. "I'll call them an ambulance, doctor," she offered, though everyone in the room knew St. Mary's was over 30 minutes away, time Tanisha and her baby didn't have. The pain intensified, and Tanisha felt a warm trickle down her thigh. When she looked down, her heart nearly stopped. Blood, too much blood, staining the thin hospital gown and the sheets beneath her. "My baby!" The scream tore from her throat, primal and desperate. "Please, my baby's dying." The monitoring equipment's beeping became more erratic, its rhythm matching the frantic beating of Tanisha's heart. Through tears, she could see the numbers on the fetal heart monitor dropping, 120, 115, 108, each descent marking precious seconds of her child's life slipping away. Dr. Harrison turned to leave, his back a wall of starched white cotton and centuries of ingrained prejudice. "Nurses, prepare to transfer the patient, and someone clean up this mess." His shoes clicked against the floor as he walked away, each step a death knell for Tanisha's hopes. In her delirium, Tanisha began to hallucinate. She saw Martin, standing by her bedside in his favorite blue sweater, the one she'd buried him in. He reached for her hand, his touch as warm as she remembered. "Stay strong, baby," his ghost whispered. "Help is coming." The nurses began disconnecting the monitoring equipment, their movements efficient and detached. The sudden silence was deafening. No more beeping to track her baby's fading heartbeat. No more electronic witnesses to their cruelty. Through the window, the storm raged harder, as if nature itself was trying to break through the glass to help her. The old oak tree thrashed in the wind, its branches scraping against the building like fingernails on a chalkboard. Thunder crashed overhead, drowning out Tanisha's weakening pleas. Two orderlies appeared, summoned by some unseen signal. Their faces were blank masks as they began to wheel her bed toward the service entrance. The ceiling lights passed overhead, bright, dark, bright, dark, like a strobe light showing snapshots of her tragedy in slow motion. Tanisha's mind drifted to her mother, who had died bringing her into this world, in this very hospital. Had she too lain here alone and afraid? Had she faced the same cold stares, the same cruel indifference? The weight of generational trauma pressed down on Tanisha's chest, heavier than any physical pain. The service door opened with a metallic groan, releasing a blast of rain-laden air that smelled of wet asphalt and despair. The orderlies pushed her out into the storm, the rain immediately soaking through her thin gown. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty parking lot where they intended to leave her, out of sight, out of mind, like so much discarded trash. As consciousness began to fade, Tanisha's prayers turned from pleas for help to begging forgiveness from her unborn child. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her belly, her hand resting on the spot where she'd felt the last kick. "I'm so sorry, little Martin. Mama tried so hard." The world began to dim around the edges, the rain on her face feeling more like tears. Through the gathering darkness, she thought she saw headlights cutting through the storm, heard a car door slam, felt running footsteps approaching. A man's voice, rich with authority and rage, cut through her fading consciousness. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" But it was too late. Tanisha slipped into unconsciousness, her last thought a mix of hope and despair, hope that someone had finally come to help, despair that it might be too late for the precious life within her. Unknown to her in that moment, Samuel L. Jackson, a wealthy businessman who had taken a wrong turn in the storm, was about to change her life forever. His discovery of her would set in motion a chain of events that would bring both justice and healing. But for now, she floated in darkness, suspended between life and death, between tragedy and salvation, her story a testament to both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human compassion. The rain continued to fall, washing away her tears, but not the sins of those who had sworn to do no harm, as the night prepared to give way to a dawn that would bring either devastating loss or miraculous hope. A childhood of hardship. The morning Tanisha Grant was born, hope and tragedy arrived hand in hand at Rocheport Village Hospital. As the sun rose over the Missouri River, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, her mother, Evelyn Grant, held her newborn daughter for the first and last time. "My beautiful Tanisha," she whispered, her strength fading with each precious word. "Be stronger than I was. Be braver." 10 minutes later, Evelyn closed her eyes forever, leaving her daughter to face the world alone. James Grant, Tanisha's father, stood by the nursery window that morning, his large hands pressed against the glass as he watched his daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware of her loss. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he made a silent promise to his late wife to give their daughter all the love she would have shown her. For 9 years, he kept that promise with everything he had. Their small house on the outskirts of Rocheport became a sanctuary of love. James worked double shifts at the local factory, his hands growing calloused and worn, but he always found energy to read Tanisha bedtime stories. He braided her hair each morning before school, his rough fingers becoming surprisingly gentle as they wove her dark curls into neat plaits. "Your mama used to wear her hair just like this," he'd say, his voice soft with memory. On weekends, they'd sit on their tiny porch, James teaching Tanisha to play the old guitar he'd had since high school. Her small fingers would stumble over the strings as she tried to follow along with his deep, melodic voice, singing blues songs that spoke of both suffering and hope. "Music helps heal the soul, baby girl," he'd tell her, his eyes distant but warm. "When life gets hard, let the music carry you through." But fate wasn't finished testing young Tanisha. On a rainy Tuesday in April, when she was 9 years old, James Grant left for work as usual, kissing his daughter goodbye at the bus stop. "Be good, princess," he said, using his special nickname for her. "I'm making your favorite sweet potato pie tonight." That was the last time she saw him alive. A machinery malfunction at the factory took him away forever, leaving Tanisha truly alone in the world. The funeral was small but dignified, paid for by the factory's insurance. Tanisha stood by her father's grave in the dress he'd bought her for Easter, clutching the guitar he'd taught her to play, her young heart struggling to understand why God had taken both her parents. As the mourners dispersed, her Aunt Regina approached, her high heels sinking into the cemetery grass. Aunt Regina Mason was Evelyn's older sister, a woman whose bitter heart had hardened after years of her own struggles. She took Tanisha home to her house on the other side of town, where the windows were always closed and laughter was considered a waste of breath. The guitar was the first thing to go, locked away in the attic, along with photos of James and Evelyn. "Music won't put food on the table or clothes on your back," Regina declared. "It's time you learned about real life." Real life, according to Aunt Regina, meant waking up at 5 a.m. to clean the house before school. It meant scrubbing pots until her hands were raw, sweeping floors until blisters formed on her palms, and washing windows until her arms ached. "You'll earn your keep in this house," Regina would say, inspecting Tanisha's work with critical eyes. "Nobody gets a free ride in this world." The only escape Tanisha found was in her studies. Late at night, after her chores were done, she would huddle under her thin blanket with a flashlight, reading borrowed books from the school library. She excelled in her classes, each perfect grade a quiet rebellion against the circumstances life had dealt her. Her teachers noticed her intelligence and dedication, but whenever they tried to speak to Aunt Regina about Tanisha's potential, they were met with cold dismissal. The other children at school kept their distance, warned away by her threadbare clothes and the perpetual sadness in her eyes. During lunch breaks, she would sit alone, humming her father's blues songs under her breath, holding on to the memories of love and music like precious jewels in a secret box. Years passed this way, marked by endless chores and silent tears. Tanisha grew tall and graceful despite her hardships, her mother's beauty emerging in her features, her father's strength evident in her quiet determination. She learned to find moments of joy in small things. The way sunlight danced through leaves, the sound of rain on the roof, the satisfaction of learning something new. On her 16th birthday, with no celebration or acknowledgement from her aunt, Tanisha snuck into the attic and found her father's old guitar. The strings were dusty and out of tune, but when she held it, she could almost feel his presence. That night, she made herself a promise. She would not let her past define her future. She would find a way to build the life her parents had dreamed of for her. Little did she know that very soon, in the halls of Rocheport High School, fate would finally show her kindness. A boy named Martin Gray would notice her sitting alone, reading her beloved books, and would ask to join her. Their love story would begin with a simple question about algebra homework, but it would grow into something that would help heal the wounds of her childhood. But on that birthday night, As 16-year-old Tanisha sat in the attic with her father's guitar, she was still just a girl who had lost everything except her hope. She strummed the out-of-tune strings gently, remembering her father's words. "Music helps heal the soul, baby girl." And in the quiet darkness, she began to sing softly, her voice carrying the weight of her past and the promise of her future. Outside, a crescent moon hung in the sky, much like the one that had shone the night she was born. And somewhere, perhaps, Evelyn and James Grant watched over their daughter, proud of the strength she had found in her suffering, waiting for the day when love would finally find its way back into her life. First love's sweet promise. The autumn sun streamed through the windows of Rocheport High School's library, dust motes dancing in the golden light as Tanisha Grant bent over her calculus textbook. Her long braids, carefully done before dawn so as not to anger Aunt Regina, fell forward across her worn notebook. It was September 15th, a date that would forever mark the beginning of her life's first true happiness. Martin Gray wasn't like the other boys at school. While they rushed through the halls with boisterous energy, he moved with a quiet grace that seemed beyond his 16 years. The son of a local mechanic and a kindergarten teacher, he carried himself with a dignity that spoke of parents who had raised him to know his worth in a world that often denied it. "Is anyone sitting here?" His voice was gentle, musical almost, as he gestured to the empty chair across from Tanisha. She looked up, startled by the interruption of her solitude, and met eyes so kind they made her heart skip. Martin stood there, tall and lean in his clean but clearly second-hand clothes, holding his own calculus book like a shield. "No," she whispered, then cleared her throat and found her voice. "No, please, sit." She moved her book slightly, creating space at the weathered oak table she'd claimed as her sanctuary. During lunch periods for the past 2 years, Martin settled into the chair, his movements careful, deliberate. "I've seen you in Mr. Patterson's class," he said, opening his textbook to the same page she'd been studying. "You're the one who actually understands derivatives." A small smile tugged at her lips, the first real smile in longer than she could remember. "They're not so bad once you understand the patterns." She hesitated, then added, I could show you, if you'd like." That first conversation sprawled from derivatives to dreams, from mathematics to music. Martin's face lit up when she mentioned her father's guitar. "I play, too," he said, leaning forward eagerly. "My dad taught me on his old Fender. Do you still play?" Tanisha's eyes clouded briefly. "Not anymore. My aunt, she doesn't approve of music." She looked down at her hands, calloused from years of cleaning. "Then we'll have to do something about that," Martin said with quiet determination, and he did. Their love story unfolded in secret moments and stolen glances. Martin would wait for her after school, walking her halfway home before she had to rush to complete her aunt's endless list of chores. On Saturdays, when Regina thought Tanisha was at the library studying, Martin would bring his father's guitar to the old gazebo in Palmer Park. There, hidden by overgrown wisteria vines, he taught her to play again. "Your fingers remember," he said softly, watching her hands move across the strings. "Music never really leaves you." He was right. The songs her father had taught her came flowing back, and with them, the feeling of being truly alive. Their first kiss happened on a crisp October evening, the Missouri River flowing quietly behind them as they sat on an old blanket in their secret spot by the riverbank. Martin had brought his mother's homemade cookies and a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God, Tanisha's favorite book, which she'd mentioned weeks before. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he told her, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "And the most beautiful." When his lips met hers, Tanisha felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crumble. Their love grew deeper through their junior and senior years, surviving Regina's disapproval and the whispered judgments of small-minded people. They studied together, dreamed together, planned their future in whispered conversations between classes. Martin worked after school at his father's garage, saving every penny. Tanisha took on tutoring jobs, hiding her earnings in a shoebox beneath the loose floorboard under her bed. On graduation night, while their classmates celebrated at the official party, Martin and Tanisha sat in their gazebo. Fairy lights he'd secretly strung up twinkled above them, and the old guitar lay between them. "Marry me," he said, holding out a small ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Let's build the life we've been dreaming of." They married the summer after graduation, when they were both 19. The ceremony was small. Martin's parents, his younger sister, and a few trusted friends gathered in the community church. Tanisha wore a simple white dress she'd saved for months to buy, and Martin wore his father's suit, carefully altered. When they exchanged vows, Martin's mother played the church piano, the same songs Tanisha's father used to sing. Their first apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom walk-up above the local diner. The furniture was second-hand, the walls needed painting, and the windows stuck when it rained. But to Tanisha, it was paradise. Every morning, she woke up to Martin's smile, to gentle kisses and shared dreams. They both took classes at the local community college, Martin studying engineering, Tanisha pursuing education, both determined to build a better future. In the evenings, they would sit on their small balcony, playing their guitars together. Martin had surprised her with one of her own as a wedding gift. Their music would float out over the street below, a testimony to love's ability to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. For 3 years, their love grew stronger with each passing day. They weathered financial struggles, long hours of work and study, and the lingering shadows of Tanisha's past. Martin held her through nightmares about her parents, celebrated her small victories, and showed her daily what it meant to be truly loved. "We're going to make it, baby," he would say, holding her close. "Everything we've dreamed of, we'll make it all come true." Neither of them knew that fate had other plans, that their symphony of love was about to be cut tragically short. That one rainy morning, Martin would kiss her goodbye, heading to his part-time job at the garage, and never return. But in those 3 precious years, Martin Gray gave Tanisha something priceless. He taught her that she was worthy of love, that joy was possible, that dreams could come true. And though their time together would prove all too brief, the love they shared would leave Tanisha with an unexpected gift. A child growing beneath her heart, a last precious piece of the man who had taught her to smile again. Tragedy strikes twice. The morning of April 12th dawned grey and sullen, as if the sky itself knew what tragedy the day would bring. Tanisha stood at their apartment window, watching Martin pull on his worn leather jacket, the one she'd saved 3 months to buy him for his last birthday. The forecast promised rain, and she worried about him riding his motorcycle to work. "Take the bus today, baby," she pleaded, straightening his collar. "Weather report says it's going to storm." Martin's laugh was warm as he pulled her close. "Don't worry so much, I've ridden in worse." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, lingering there as if some part of him sensed this would be their last embrace. "I'm making your favorite gumbo tonight, Mama's recipe. Don't be late coming home from class." "I love you," Tanisha called after him as he headed down the stairs. He turned back, flashing that brilliant smile that had first captured her heart 3 years ago. "Love you more, beautiful," he replied, his voice echoing in the stairwell. "Always and forever." Those were the last words Martin Gray would ever speak to his wife. The rain started around noon, fat drops hammering against the windows of the community college where Tanisha sat through her education theory class. She was distracted, her mind wandering to the strange nausea she'd been feeling lately, wondering if she should stop by the pharmacy on her way home. The knock on the classroom door came at 2:17 p.m. "Mrs. Gray?" The dean's face was grave as she stood in the doorway. "Could you come with me, please?" The next hours passed in a blur of police officers, fluorescent hospital lights, and words that couldn't be real. Wet roads, lost control, died instantly, nothing could be done. Martin's father stood like a statue in the hospital corridor, his large mechanic's hands helpless at his sides. His mother wept quietly, clutching the leather jacket the paramedics had cut off her son's body. Tanisha moved through the following days like a sleepwalker. She sat through the funeral service, wearing the black dress Martin had helped her pick out for a cousin's wedding just months before, her fingers absently twisting her wedding ring. Their guitar duets still sat on the music stand in their apartment, waiting for an encore that would never come. The morning sickness started in earnest a week after they laid Martin to rest. At first, Tanisha dismissed it as grief, as her body's reaction to the crushing weight of loss. But as days passed and the symptoms persisted, a different possibility began to take shape in her mind. The pregnancy test she bought from Walker's pharmacy shook in her hands as she waited the required 3 minutes in their, now her, tiny bathroom. When 2 pink lines appeared clear and bright against the white plastic, Tanisha slid to the floor, her emotions a storm of joy and devastation. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to Martin's smiling photo on the wall. "That's why you were so insistent about making that gumbo. You always said it was your mama's welcome to the family meal." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, but these were different from the tears of pure grief she'd been crying for days. The first ultrasound was a study in contradictions. Tanisha lay on the examination table alone, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing as the sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the room. Strong and steady, it echoed like a drumbeat against the silence Martin's death had left behind. "Everything looks perfect," the technician said kindly, pointing to the tiny flickering light on the screen. "About 8 weeks along. Due date should be around January 15th. Tanisha did the math in her head. The baby had been conceived in their last week together. Martin's final gift to her, a piece of their love that would live on. If it was a boy, she decided then and there he would be Martin Gray Jr., carrying his father's name and legacy forward. The following weeks brought morning sickness and mood swings, complicated by grief counseling and the practical matters of settling Martin's affairs. His parents insisted she keep the motorcycle insurance payout, tucking it away for the baby's future. Martin's mother came by every Sunday, bringing food and helping Tanisha sort through Martin's things, both women finding comfort in sharing memories of the man they'd lost. But as her pregnancy progressed, so did the complications. The stress of loss, combined with working extra hours to make up for Martin's lost income, began to take its toll. Her blood pressure rose and the doctor prescribed bed rest, a luxury Tanisha couldn't afford. She continued pushing herself, determined to provide for her baby the way Martin would have wanted. By her 7th month, the warning signs could no longer be ignored. Dizziness, swelling, spots dancing before her eyes. Her body was screaming for help. But Tanisha, like generations of strong women before her, kept going until she couldn't. Until that fateful night when labor came too early, driving her to a hospital where hatred would compound tragedy, where she would find herself fighting not just for her own life, but for the last precious piece of Martin she had left. As she lay in the hospital bed, begging for help that wouldn't come, Tanisha clutched her swollen belly and whispered the blues song Martin used to play. "Hold on, little one," she sang softly, her voice breaking. "Your daddy's watching over us. Just hold on." But in the cruelest twist of fate, this baby, conceived in love, carried in grief, and fought for with every ounce of strength Tanisha possessed, would become another chapter in her story of loss, a chapter that would bring her to the brink of despair, only to find that sometimes, from the deepest darkness, the brightest light can emerge. In the years to come, Tanisha would learn that while some losses leave permanent scars, they don't have to be the end of the story. That sometimes, when one dream dies, another can take root and grow in its place. But in that moment, as the storm raged outside Rocheport Village Hospital, all she knew was the desperate need to save the last piece of Martin she had left, unaware that destiny was about to take an unexpected turn. The darkest hour. The storm that raged over Rocheport Village Hospital that night seemed to mirror the darkness gathering in room 204. The skeleton crew working the graveyard shift moved through the dimly lit corridors like ghosts, their shadows stretching long against walls that had witnessed countless births and deaths, joys and sorrows, but none quite like this. Dr. William Harrison stood before the nurse's station, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights as he reviewed Tanisha's chart with calculated indifference. The monitor behind him displayed her vital signs: blood pressure dangerously high, fetal heartbeat growing more erratic with each passing minute. "We can't officially refuse her treatment," he muttered to nurses Collins and Palmer, his voice low and measured, "but we can strongly encourage her to seek care elsewhere. St. Mary's in Columbia has more appropriate facilities for these cases." His emphasis on appropriate carried generations of prejudice wrapped in a thin veneer of medical protocol. Nurse Sarah Palmer shifted uncomfortably, her conscience warring with years of conditioned compliance. "Doctor, her pressure is 160/100. The baby's in distress. We can't just... We can and we will," Harrison cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "I won't risk the reputation of this hospital on a high-risk patient who should have had proper prenatal care to begin with." He conveniently ignored the fact that Tanisha had been receiving care until her regular doctor went on emergency leave 2 weeks ago. Down the hall, Tanisha's cries echoed off the sterile walls, each one a testament to both physical agony and emotional anguish. Her hospital gown was soaked with sweat, her braids coming undone as she writhed against another contraction. The small gold cross her mother-in-law had given her glinted at her throat, catching the light with each labored breath. "Martin," she whispered between pains, her hand instinctively reaching for someone who wasn't there. "I can't lose our baby too. Please, not our baby too." The empty chair beside her bed seemed to mock her solitude, its metal frame cold and unyielding like the hearts of those who had sworn to help her. The monitoring equipment continued its ominous symphony, the irregular beeping of the fetal heart monitor growing fainter, the blood pressure cuff automatically inflating every 15 minutes to record increasingly alarming numbers. Warning lights flashed, ignored by the staff who had chosen this night to betray their oaths. Outside her room, the storm intensified. Lightning illuminated the parking lot in stark bursts, thunder rolling across the sky like heaven's own protest against what was unfolding below. The old oak tree that had stood sentinel over the hospital for generations thrashed in the wind, its branches scraping against windows like desperate fingers trying to claw their way in. At 2:47 a.m., Tanisha felt something change. A warm gush of fluid tinged with red soaked through the sheets. The pain transformed from rhythmic waves to a constant crushing pressure. Her vision began to blur at the edges, dark spots dancing before her eyes as her blood pressure continued to climb. "Please," she begged, as Dr. Harrison made his final appearance, flanked by his loyal nurses. "My baby. Can't you hear his heartbeat getting weaker? He's dying." Her words dissolved into sobs as another contraction gripped her. Dr. Harrison's response was clinical, rehearsed. "As I've explained, Mrs. Gray, we're not equipped to handle your case. We've called an ambulance to transfer you to St. Mary's." They all knew the ambulance hadn't been called. They all knew 30 minutes to Columbia might as well be eternity. The orderlies arrived like undertakers, their faces carefully blank, as they began disconnecting monitors and preparing to move her bed. Each disconnected wire felt like another lifeline being cut. Each beep silenced another voice being stifled. Through her tears, Tanisha caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. A young black woman in distress, abandoned by those who had sworn to help, fighting for her baby's life in a hospital where her own mother had died, giving birth to her. The cruel symmetry was not lost on her failing consciousness. They wheeled her through the service entrance, the cold rain hitting her face like tiny needles. The parking lot stretched before her, empty except for a few staff cars and the deepening puddles that reflected the storm-torn sky. As they pushed her bed to the edge of the lot, leaving her to the mercy of the elements, Tanisha felt the last movements of her baby growing weaker. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn child, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Mama tried. God knows Mama tried." Her consciousness began to fade, the world growing dim around the edges. The rain mixed with her tears, washing them away into the darkness. It was 3:03 a.m. when headlights cut through the gloom, a car having taken a wrong turn into the service entrance. The universe, it seemed, had decided that while tragedy might have its moment, it would not have the final word. Samuel L. Jackson, a businessman whose GPS had malfunctioned in the storm, was about to stumble upon a scene that would change multiple lives forever. But in those moments before help arrived, as Tanisha lay suspended between life and death, between despair and salvation, the full weight of societal prejudice and institutional cruelty bore down upon her like the storm itself. Her story, already marked by loss and resilience, was about to take another turn, one that would eventually transform personal tragedy into a catalyst for change. The rain continued to fall, each drop adding to the tears of a woman who had lost too much, each flash of lightning illuminating a scene of injustice that would soon be brought into the harsh light of day. And somewhere, perhaps, Martin watched over his wife and unborn child, his spirit raging against the storm like the old oak tree, waiting for justice to arrive in an unexpected form. The story is still continuing for part 2. Please subscribe to our channel to appreciate our efforts. God bless you and bring a smile to your face. You are great.